Hello, and thank you for listening to the podcast. We appreciate it, and we appreciate a lot of help from a lot of people all throughout this journey. So we've got a couple of shout-outs we're going to make here. The first shout-out being to Beck Sutton, the graphics designer who is designing our logo. She is the creator and owner of Primal Studios, which can be found on Facebook. Or if you go to primalst.com, you'll be able to find her work there, and she is fantastic at what she does.
Yeah, and the second shout out we'd like to make is to Andrew Stanton, composer of the song Escape the Oppression, which is the kick-ass song for our intro. We love the song, we love the dude. You can check out more of his stuff on soundstripe.com, where there's plenty of songs by plenty of other artists as well, where you can license for podcasts. So go check it out and see what's on there and see what you can use.
Stay frosty. So, we do have another great album to talk about. Take it away.
Yes, okay. So, we do have an album by, it's called Evangelist, and it's by two artists, one called Gavin Clark, and the other is Toy Drum. They've collaborated, quite a bit in the past. Pardon?
They collaborated on this album, they did.
All right. They worked together quite a few times before this album, and then they made this amazing conceptual album. A bit of backstory. So a lot of people.
What year was it released in first?
Oh yeah, sorry. So this was released in 2015, October.
Days.
Pardon?
Those beautiful romantic days of old.
Yeah.
Before pandemic killed us all.
It was released in 2015, unfortunately posthumously, because earlier on in the same year, unfortunately, Gavin Clark lost his life.
And he had a suicide pact with Toy Drum, didn't he?
Apparently.
So all children are dead now as well.
Yeah. But essentially...
That's not true. Only Gavin Clark
not true. No. So Gavin Clark, unfortunately... you may know him. If you do know him, it's from TV shows. Yeah, TV shows and films such as This Is England. In the film This Is England, at the end of the film, when the boys on the beach, you'll hear Gavin Clark's really lovely, haunting voice in a cover of the Smith song. What is it again? Please, please, please.
Let me get what I want.
Yeah, please, please, please let me get what I want, which is an amazing cover. And he's also done. He was really great friends with Shane Meadows, and he collaborated with him in quite a few of his projects. Also, if you're a fan of the This Is England TV show, I think in This Is England 90, one of the songs from this album appears in that show, called God's Song. So Gavin Clark unfortunately suffered with a lot of drug problems and alcoholism, and the alcoholism took him in the end. And this album was by all accounts, according to Shane Meadows and whatnot, this album was very personal to him, and he worked really hard on it. The concept of the album, from what I understand, is from the point of view of a preacher who gets a bit self-obsessed within his religion, and also gets a bit obsessed with drugs and alcohol. There's been a lot of debate as to whether Gavin Clark is talking as though he is the preacher or whether he's made up this character. I think it's clear to me that it's a bit of both.
When you say a lot of debate, do you just mean like the two people who've listened to the album total? Because I've not debated you about this.
Well, no. So obviously the album did get a fairly decent release, and I think it topped a couple of charts in 2015. A couple of magazines calling it one of the best albums of the year. But then since, and other than that, it's not really had much exposure at all, which is a massive shame because it's a very good album.
It was the problem of it releasing towards the holiday season, though, wasn't it? So it's being released towards Christmas, that's when you tend to get a lot of shit songs that top the charts.
It's a lot to do with Gavin had a lot of bad. He had tried to be in a load of different bands. He also quit music, became a delivery man again, and then got back into music. Shane Meadows was always a massive fan of his music and tried to egg him on. There's actually a really, really great documentary by Shane Meadows called The Living Room, which is about Gavin Clark and about his work as an artist, as a really struggling artist, struggling to get his voice heard and out there. And if you listen to this album, it's a very good album. Again, from the point of view of a preacher, sort of losing his way or becoming a bit self-obsessed. And unfortunately, the album wasn't finished. So there's a lot of work still on the floor somewhere. And I wish I could hear where it sort of ended up. But
well, Toy Drum had to finish the album, didn't they? Sort of posthumously for him.
yeah. And there's a lot you can hear in this. It's a very deep album. Gavin Clark had a lot of interesting views about faith, about religion as an organization. I don't think I don't know too much about him, and I don't, from what I understand, think he was like ultra religious or ultra atheist and whatnot. But I think it's clear, you can hear in this album, that he's definitely got a lot of criticism about religion as a business or as an organization, and the conundrum between having faith in something or being a part of some sort of systematic belief, which I believe personally you can separate the two, and one is very much more in line than the other, and one can be very, very much manipulated. And in a lot of the songs in this album, you'll hear songs about how religion can be manipulated and can manipulate people, not only to do things that someone wants, or also to feed the ego of someone, and it can get quite dangerous. Me and you both being quite atheists and having quite strong opinions on,
some would say, militant.
Religion. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against anyone practicing any form of faith, but like Gavin Clark, I do have issue with organized religion or religion systematically.
If people want to get my opinions, just read God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens, the late great Christopher Hitchens.
The late great Christopher Hitchens, indeed, yeah.
Apart from his stuff on the Iraq War, he was a bit out there on that.
No,
aside from that, he was good.
Pretty switched on, yeah. And obviously there's I don't know if you listen to these guys personally, but obviously there's great speakers out there like Sam Harris and
they're part of the Four Horsemen, they called themselves, which was Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris.
Yeah, and they're very, very seeing themselves as the four great atheists, very much against religion. I don't necessarily think, it depends on which one you're talking about. I mean, Sam Harris, I don't think is against faith. Not so much anymore, because he's gotten quite into some of the teachings of Buddhism, but not as an organization, but as the sort of psychological, therapeutical aspects of it. There's also great speakers as well, like Jordan Peterson, whether you agree with him or not. He's very much not necessarily he's not anti-religious at all, but he obviously has some critical views on it as an organization. And that's kind of where I stand, and I think that's where Gavin Clark stands. The album itself, musically, is sonically really interesting. It's got this deep rock sound with almost like these party dance influences in the background.
But also another real sort of sound as well. So it sounds... I don't want to say spacey, because I've said spacey before, and it was a terrible choice of words, but...
There's sonic.
There's certainly a sort of almost a religious aspect to the music itself.
Yeah.
In the way that it runs. So I'm going to go for a couple of interesting polls here, because we always do this for every album. So the first one, I don't know how much of John Frusciante's solo stuff you've listened to in the past.
No, not too much.
I think it was 2009, might have been. He released an album called The Empyrean, which is very much this kind of thing where it's about religion. Musically, it sounds similar, but my other polls, one of them you're not going to agree with, two of them you're not going to know.
Right.
I'm pretty sure. So, and I hate to keep harping on about this band, but I do love them. The Indelicates. David Koresh Superstar. Musically, is similar, but also explores this weird theme of religion. And Diseases of England by the Indelicates, which is more musically, it sounds similar. But the other poll I was going to go for, and this is nothing to do with music or the lyrics, it's more to do with the idea of the concept album or the feeling of the concept album, was Black Parade by Mike M. Because,
Okay, I get where you're coming from in terms of like, yeah, it's a themed album.
yeah, it's more in the sense, well, is I tend to get the sense from this album, as much as it's about religion as well, it's a person dealing with their own mortality.
Yeah,
Which
it very
for Black,
much is.
whereas Black Parade is literally a person dying and going through all those stages.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah.
That's
And
where I get the poll from that.
this album does have that. It's very much as the album goes on, this character or Gavin Clark, whether it's him or not. I think it's probably insensitive to say it's him, so I'd say this character of the preacher.
I think it's sort of semi-autobiographical would be
Yeah,
how I'd interpret it.
yeah. But yeah, this character has this slow descent into one, his own ego, sort of being taking himself over, almost feeling godlike himself, and also as the album goes on, this character also gets more and more entranced with drugs and women, and finds a way, or is thinking of ways of how the two can be combined and how he can get what he wants and how no one will know about it, or how it doesn't really matter because he's so powerful anyway. It talks a lot about power. It's almost political in that way, about how power corrupts and how people in certain positions can think, or it's possible to think in a certain way when you're in a certain position to just really get what you want and manipulate.
Well, it's absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Completely, yeah.
Now, here's, I'm not going to say an interesting tidbit, but more just how things mirror each other in odd ways. So I would say this is possibly the best album that came out, at least in that sort of month at that time.
Right.
Do you know what the next greatest album after it was, which was recorded probably around a similar sort of time as this one?
What does that mean?
Black Star by David Bowie.
Oh, right,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
recorded in January to March 2015 and then released in January 2016. So it's no parallel of that's also an album where a man is facing his own mortality.
Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah, and I suppose style of music wise, it's a little bit more akin to that as well.
And do you want to know the other odd thing with it? Do you want to know Do you know how much time separates the two running times of the albums?
How much?
2 seconds.
Oh wow, that's a weird thing to pick up. Very, very observant of you, Jake.
I know. So this album runs for a grand total of 41 minutes 16 seconds.
Yeah.
Black Star runs for 41 minutes 14 seconds.
Yeah, but obviously this album wasn't finished, so
yeah, it could have run for longer.
But yeah, so I suppose we haven't really talked about genre as much. I suppose this is it's hard to put a genre on this album, but what I would suggest is if you like bands like Kasabian, the more rock and roll British scene, then you'll like this too. It's definitely got similar, in some songs it's got a similar sort of bass sound or guitar sounds to older Kasabian songs, but also it's a lot more deeper than that. It's slower tempo, and
I would go for if you're a fan of Tom Waits.
That's a very good pick. Yeah, if you're a fan of Tom Waits and you put
Which
a
I am
British
not.
spin on it. No. But if you put a British spin on it. So an interesting thing, we talked a little bit before this podcast, but I was really unsure whether you'd get behind this album or not, because it's definitely not the sort of music you usually listen to. But I know it's definitely it's talking about a thing that you find very interesting. So I didn't know whether you'd enjoy it or not.
I thought it was fantastic. I think it depends. So like the way to intrigue me is have good lyrics. Song titles are important, but musically is the main thing. So if musically you're dull or there's nothing behind it and it feels vacuous, I'm less inclined to like it. But the music was perfect.
Yeah, Toy Drum does a great job.
Well, I was somewhat hesitant when I sort of found it like Toy Drum were sort of usually do like trip hop and things like that. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be weird. But the job they do on the album, backing it, is phenomenal. Like they don't lean into what are presumably their strengths. They go with what the music dictates.
Everyone's working really hard towards the themes, and the atmosphere of this album, and it's very much a passion project.
Atmosphere is the
it
right word.
works. Yeah,
It's a very atmospheric album. It's somewhat dark, and
it is very dark.
This is the surprising thing. Darkness is my realm. The little pixie of light has come in here.
Yeah, I think I like it's got a lot of grit to this album, and what I really identify with it. Well, I do identify with it in a lot of ways, because I do think it paints a certain picture about UK culture that does still exist, that people don't realize exists. And
when you say UK culture, you're talking more about the fact that we still refer to ourselves as a Christian nation.
Yeah, all of that sort of stuff. And like, I mean, like, day in, day out, you rarely talk to people about religion in the UK anymore, because it definitely is not as big of a thing as it used to be. But if you actually talk to people, if you bring up certain subjects, they suddenly get really they feel really passionate either one way or the other about these sort of things. And especially religion as an organization in the UK. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not necessarily talking about faith. Again, I have no issues with faith. And this album does pick up on issues. Well, not issues with faith, but it does pick up on the positives of faith.
I do have issues with faith.
Okay, yeah.
Purely from one standpoint. And again, I also get the sense from the album as well, it's the hypocrisy of faith.
Yeah.
So you proclaim to believe in something where you know that the end game, if you behave badly, is eternal damnation.
Yeah.
But you still act like a complete and utter chub.
Yeah. Well, but that's where I get into the disillusion of it, because so one thing this album pulls up on time and time again from this character is it doesn't necessarily matter what this character does, because he is so sure that he is going to a perfect place in the afterlife, and he'll condemn others, and he'll talk about heaven, the concepts of heaven and hell. But this character, because he's in the position he's in, he thinks he's almost guaranteed to go to heaven.
Well, you look at
so it
song
gives
8, isn't it?
It gives him an excuse. Pardon?
Song 8, The Believer, I'm Never Wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the perfect depiction of it.
Completely. And also there's another one, No One Will Ever Know, sort of thing.
Now,
and like
with that song,
yeah,
and this is where my A-level English comes back into play again. People, a D, better than you, fucking plebs.
I got a B.
Did you get a B? Did you?
Yeah, I got a B.
Yeah, to be fair, you probably turned up for most of the lessons and did coursework.
Yeah,
those are the things I neglected to do. I was too busy like going out to have for one of my friends to take blood and hold our hand.
Yeah, fair.
If you remember rightly. I had better things to do. I was smoking down at Kessie. I had to do that. I didn't want to listen to fucking Mrs. Prince droll on about the Crucible for the 6 billionth time in my life. Well, the Crucible says this. Yes, I know it's about fucking McCarthyism, and it's not an allegory. Don't tell me it's an allegory. Allegory is the wrong word to use here. Off. Although I did get to prove my intelligence once in that lesson. Come to think of it.
Wait, you were about to say something about No One Will Ever Know.
Yeah. Let me prove my intelligence first.
Okay.
No, she was asking about. She was talking about the religion aspect of. I can't remember if it's the Crucible we were doing Faust or something like that. Mm-hmm. It might be. It was Faust actually. Dr. Faustus. So she was talking about that by Christopher Marlowe. She was talking about that, and the whole very concept of pride before the fall came up, and I was like, well, surely that's an allusion back to John Milton from Paradise Lost, where it was Lucifer's pride and biggity bam. But then followed up with that, it was like, hey, here's an interesting tidbit. I know what the word for the fear of the number 666 is. It's hexaconsexophobia.
Wow, well done.
Yeah. I've been sitting on that all my life, just waiting to get it out there in the public domain. Come on, people.
Well, I hope that tangent was worth it, mate.
We're going to be known as the Hexacosiites. From now on, that's my fan group.
But again, no, like that play actually fits into this album really well, because I mean, it's up for debate whether. Pardon, yeah, it's up for debate, obviously, whether that play or is pro-religious or anti-religious. But no matter what, the character is so sure and certain of what they're doing, and so sure of certain of where they'll end up that they use it as an excuse to be as vile or as well. They use it as an excuse for whatever they need at any given time, and that's what this character does in this album.
We'll go back to the thing I picked out then. On your notes there, have you got the album list written down, or have you got it on Spotify?
I've got the album list written down, yeah.
So for No One Will Ever Know, how do you have that spelt?
I've got it's no as in one. What do you mean? It's spelled the way it's supposed to be.
So on the album listing I had, it's No One Will Ever Know, but the first no as in knowledge.
Right, yeah.
And then the last no also being knowledge as well.
Yeah.
Which would be the incorrect way grammatically.
Yeah, completely.
So I was just wondering how deliberate that was, or if that was just a spelling mistake.
No. I think that's it's very deliberate, because the whole point is, especially in that song as well, is the point of the fact of this character has this sense he believes he has this sense that he just knows something is fact, and other people just can't even grasp the concept of it. And a lot of the time he's even looking at people, I think in that song as well, but he's even looking at people who follow him, who are on his side or who believe in him, but he's looking down on them and he's going like, you have no idea how much you guys need me, because without me, everything I know that will happen, that's bad, that's going to happen, will happen to you, and I can save you because I have this knowledge that that no one else just has. Even if you believe in what I believe in, you still can't even grasp how wrong you are in your life.
It's a very deliberate choice then on the song title.
Completely. I mean, and then like there's a lot of allusions you can make to about cults in this, but I like to stray away from the cult idea, because you could easily listen to this album and go, well, this is a guy who's making a cult and he's a cult leader, and it does very much sound the similar mentality. But I think the whole point of the album is that no, this guy isn't a cult leader, he's a normal preacher, and he's a preacher who's so disillusioned by the organization he's within.
I will apologise if anyone heard me take a light and take a breath. I did just burn myself on a cigarette.
Yeah,
which was not
no. I think it takes away from what Gavin was probably trying to say, which is like this guy is just a normal guy. He is just believes he has access to something that the average person doesn't, and he also believes that what the average person does is so sickening.
And I think it also brings up a debate about going back to the whole cult aesthetic of it. It does bring about the debate then, do you view organised religion as a cult?
Well, so I think that's what this is pulling. I think if you listen to this album and instantly go to a cult, then you got to kind of think, well, then so how do you differentiate if I can speak, how do you make the difference between organized religion and the church and a cult? Is it just simply the amount of members and the amount of leaders? Is that the only thing that separates them?
It's even the name of the album. So if you think of evangelists, you tend to think of like the televangelists in America.
Yeah.
Or the evangelical preachers who will be like, give me money and I can cure you. But they can't cure you, but you give them a shit ton of money. And they refer to it as seeds that they sow forward. But that's an acceptable form of religion. Whereas Scientology, for instance, you look at it and go, cult.
Yeah. The average person looks at it as a cult, even though it is actually still a religion. It is nationally sort of understood as a religion, but so's Jedi in some countries as well. Like this is where it becomes quite laughable. But yeah. So, and the evangelical aspect is of course most of us can look at an evangelist, and go, well, they do all of that for their own benefit, and bless all these people. They're so disillusioned and they're so in awe of him that they don't realize it's all just going back into his pocket. But then that's the point with this album, is like, well, you don't realize how sometimes in organized religion, you don't realize how your faith feeds the ego and the power of a certain individual, even if they're not necessarily getting something out of it financially. You have no idea how much power those people have.
Yeah.
and what they do in their free time. I mean, this character obviously has a lot of people who believe in him, who also have a lot of faith in him, and at certain points in the album he calls upon people to get certain benefits of that. But also in his spare time, he will go get hookers, or he'll go into drugs, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but I'm sure those people who follow him wouldn't agree with that sort of behavior. And then on the flip side, later on in the album, he looks at people who do those sort of things and says they're going to hell. And when Jesus comes back in the rapture, I hope that he looks at me and realizes how he's different from those people, even though they're doing the exact same thing.
Well, this is where my comparison to David Koresh Superstar by Indulgent's come up.
Yeah.
Is that's again a concept album about David Koresh, who, if people who don't know, he was I think it was the Branch Davidian church he was leader of in America, who were set up in Waco.
Yeah.
And that ended up with the siege of Waco by the ATF.
Yeah.
But you've very clearly got a structure, at least in the beginning, before we get to the ATF raid and the Oklahoma City bombings and things like that on the album. He talks about Koresh, or Simon Indelica and Julian Indelica talk about Koresh and his progression in how he screws a minister's daughter and things like that. He does these things which would be typically seen as immoral, despite preaching morality in himself.
Yeah.
Which is that dichotomy of you can justify your own behaviours if you've got a belief system which you can justify it with.
Well, and I think sometimes, this is my own opinion, of course, but I think that when you get to a certain position where so many people believe what you say is right, you start to also think anything you say is right and everything you do is right, and you put yourself, because it's a loop. You fed them, they believe you, and then they'll feed you in your belief in yourself, and then you start to put yourself on this next level of humanity where
you sort of deify
same rules,
yourself.
the same rules don't apply, and of course I'm not saying this happens to every single person, and I don't think Gavin is saying this happens to every single person who's in a high up position in any church or any religion, but it's definitely a possibility. And I think that's the argument, is if something's so possible that it's happened so often and it continues to happen so often, shouldn't we look at it?
Well, you go back to Roman Catholicism and the scores of children who have been abused by the Roman Catholic Church, and how that's been covered up over the years, but they still preach right and wrong, you go to heaven or hell, and hell is for anyone who sins or doesn't take communion. So there's always been that sort of split personality of religion, of we'll preach from the pulpit, we'll tell you what you have to believe, but much like the pigs in Animal Farm, we believe that all animals should be equal, some more equal than others. It's a concept that I think it sort of transcends religion in a certain way, if we take the Animal Farm interpretation, because it could then be applied to communism, dictatorships, anything like that as well. But religion seems to be the best way of viewing it through a kaleidoscope.
I think so. I think it's because it's just because it's not necessarily. No, I don't know how to put it. It's harder. It's harder to put these same criticisms to a government or any form of really, really important sort of organization, because we've still not worked out how to do that correctly in any form, and that's still an experiment. Whereas religion has always claimed to have the correct and ultimately right way of working.
Well, I think we're also viewing it from a 21st century eye as well. So I would say for us, like, we've never experienced religion as being the ultimate or the all-being. Whereas if you look centuries past, obviously religion very much went hand in hand with the government. So you'd have, sectarians murdered. You would have people who believed in the wrong version of Christ murdered.
Yeah, so religions hating religions and wars.
Exactly, and obviously that came from, at least in the UK sense, that would have come from the crown as well. So you have the odd split of, obviously, we go back to Henry VIII, for instance. He split from the church so he could or he split from the Roman Catholics purely so he could divorce his wife and fuck other people.
Yeah, and that's
And
a great example of a really powerful person using um, some sort of form of belief system and religious system to get his own benefits.
exactly, and then that obviously then led into him sort of murdering Catholics, burning them or beheading them or hanging them, however he did. And then the same goes then for Mary after that, and then Elizabeth. Like,
Yeah,
we never had that sort of power structure where religion was the all being. We've got to bow down to that alongside.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
but so I think that's why we can look at religion now and sit there and go, well, it seems almost absurd that you can preach one thing but not follow it.
Yeah,
It's almost like government in a microcosm. So we can look at government and go, that's absurd, but people don't. But it's harder to fight against that. Whereas you look at religion and it's an easy target to punch down on nowadays.
yeah, but I think I do go back to, I think it's just easier to be more critical of someone who is, of anyone. Like if you take it down to a normal level, it's easier to turn around and pick on someone who is so certain they're right when you look at them and know they're wrong or think they're wrong. A government is always a rolling project, and that's the whole point of a party system. It's never saying it's ultimately correct and right. That's why we get to vote on it. It's a constant project that's always developing and evolving. The difference is religion claims to be correct and claims to have it exactly how it should be.
Well, it
And
claims to have the ultimate answer from point zip, doesn't it? That's the
yeah,
thing.
and it's not claiming, and it's not saying it's not saying it's developing or it's project. Even though religion has developed and changed. I mean, the average person, at least who follows religion, any form of religion nowadays, doesn't follow it as no, that's a broad statement to say. A lot of people don't follow religion as strictly, or their religions as strictly as you would say 200 years ago or 300 years ago, and because you're not threatened with death if you don't, or something like that. But
Well, it's the great irony is if, and this is going to be a horrible thing to say now, I reckon, but I tend to see it most when people pass away, and people come out and say, well, he's up in heaven now. But it's okay. Well, if you believe in heaven in this instant, surely you must believe in heaven and hell, if that's where you're getting your doctrines from. Yet you go
completely,
out there and you'll have sex with a person who's not your wife or whatever, or your husband.
yeah,
You'll touch pigskin, that kind of thing. So, well, surely if you believe in that thing, it's a cognitive dissonance. I
it
think is the
is.
correct phrasing for it.
Well, it's just picking and choosing when it applies to you or makes you feel better.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then you
And
can sort of,
which of course not everyone does, and we do know that I know people personally that do follow religion religiously, and they live their life by it, and that's absolutely, I'm not being critical on that. I'm just saying there's enough people out there that don't, that cause issues like what this album speaks about.
I used to be Methodist.
Did you? I never knew that.
Yeah, well, it was it's very short lived. It was when I was about, it would have been like when I first started school,
Mm.
and so because we've got a Methodist church up where I am, and I was part of the choir, which if you heard my singing voice, you know that's if they listen to that episode, this episode, sorry, then they know my singing voice is perfect for a choir because it gets
Yeah.
masked by everyone else. So it was only to about 6 or 7 or so, and then I realised that it was all bollocks. I was precocious young talent, but it was the fact of like we have to go in and sing these hymns, and that really annoyed me. So
Yeah, fair.
every assembly as well. So even though we're not necessarily a strict Christian country in the way we used to be, we still have these
We
elements
do
left
have
over.
these. We have tradition, and people look really fondly on tradition, even if they don't believe in what tradition means. I mean, like, I know so many people that aren't religious that are still obsessed with their wedding day and wearing a white dress and everything like that, and all of that's tradition. I mean, and it's actually tradition built in really horrible stuff. I mean, if you think about why a woman has to wear a white dress, and if you go into the history of that, it's actually quite like morbid.
Well, it's to
But
signify that
people,
she's a virgin, isn't it?
it is, and then it obviously would get stained and whatnot, and or they're pure and stuff. And the whole, like we're getting onto a different thing now, but the whole idea of marriage, of passing on property, and whatnot.
Do you
And I
believe in
know,
marriage?
No, not at all. And I know people like love the idea of it, and because they love the party, they love the spectacle of it, and they will wear a white dress because of the tradition of it, and they will do marriage because of the tradition of it. And I do understand as well, it's fucked, but in our country as well, there's the legal standpoint of it as well, which is a relationship is more financially secure if you're married, and there are more financial options available to you if you're married. That is the only reason I would get married, which sounds fucked and it sounds hypocritical. Like, why would you buy into something you don't believe in? But that's the way our country is built.
I think I would pretty much only do it if the person I was with and I loved really wants to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like I'd only sell out myself for a person I love.
yeah.
But
I mean,
yeah,
I'm
I
not I
understand
like,
that.
and it sounded like I was really anti-marriage then. I'm not anti-marriage. I'm not bothered about the idea of getting married. It's nothing on my mind. If I was with someone who really wanted to and they expressed why and I believed in it, then I was like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. I'm just saying that I'm not saying I have untapped knowledge that other people don't know. That all of this stuff you can just Google. But
You would
I'm
do
just
it for
saying
them to make feel good rather than doing it for your own appeasement. Is
completely.
it?
Like I'm just saying that the idea of marriage, if you actually just do a quick Google and realize what marriage stands for, what it means, and the traditions in place, you start to look at it in a more critical view. And that's the same with almost anything that we hold dear as tradition. Um,
Well,
and
it's
our
tradition to have
country
slaves.
completely. And like we should always reevaluate traditions, but some people don't like to, and some people like to hold on to things. But you got to look at why you're holding on to things. Are you holding it on for your own aesthetic benefit, or are you holding on because it's actually something you really purely believe in? And how
Well,
deep do those beliefs go in?
it's why the monarchy's never been abolished. It's
Completely.
tradition that we have a monarchy, and I don't understand that either.
Yeah. So the UK is steeped in tradition, and most of those traditions actually people don't realize do have really religious connotations. So it is
Mm.
still a massive part of our culture. Um,
It's
even
just
though
not as overt.
it's just not as in your face. I mean, and most people just don't actually class themselves as Christian or any form of religion anymore. I mean, loads of people do still get christened, but
Well, I think in terms of like census now, we're still listed as a white Christian nation, effectively.
yeah, completely. I think I know more. I think most people I know are christened. Um,
Were you?
I'm no,
You
I
weren't.
wasn't. No. My
No, I
dad
thought
is.
so.
Yeah.
But again, I through school we were brought up as Methodists rather than Roman Catholic.
Yeah. So I was brought up in my school. I went to a Church of England school.
Yeah, so similar sort of thing where christening then doesn't really happen.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Like it's in our systems. Like most schools, unless you go to now a private school, or not even a private school, but like a privately funded school or an independent school. Um, I mean that's changed in the last 10 years or so. I don't think my little sister has to pray when she goes to school or anything like that. But
Is
I have
your
to pray.
is your sister in secondary or primary at the
She's in
moment?
secondary now, but what I mean is when she went to
When she's in
primary, I
primary.
don't I don't think she had to pray when she was in primary.
Yeah, we
Uh,
used to. It was every assembly in the morning, wasn't it? You'd have
w-
to.
we had to pray twice a day in my school, in my primary school.
Yeah, I think we did it in the morning and in the afternoon before we left.
Yeah, yeah,
And you'd
same.
have to
Yeah,
sit there and go, Our Father, blah blah blah. Although oddly, yeah, we even though like our school didn't really have a particular identity as to which version of Christianity it was, because even though we're then going and doing choir in a Methodist church, we were doing the Lord's Prayer from Catholicism,
yeah. I mean,
which is Our
uh,
Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It's
obviously some, but that's again some. This is what I'm talking about, like different sects, and not just different sects, but within different regions of the country of different sects are more strict than others and practice it more, for want of a better phrase, religiously than the
and
others.
I also
I mean,
understand that from our based on our experience, obviously we're sort of ragging on Christianity more than anything, but it's the same for pretty much all religions, apart from maybe sort of like Taoism and things like that.
yeah,
Um,
when you go into Taoism or Buddhism and stuff, like you can actually be it becomes easier to be more lenient because there's a whole other aspect outside of organization. Like when I was talking about Buddhism earlier, there's Buddhism as a religion and there's also Buddhism as a philosophy.
yeah,
And if you look at Buddhism as a philosophy, I believe personally it can actually be really, really useful for the majority of people because it just teaches you a good way of thinking about things and living, basically based off of common sense and science really as well. It's a
Yeah,
good way of calming your mind.
it's not a sort of way as in your face of like, if you do something wrong, you're going to die in a pit of fire.
Well, and it's not claiming to give you. That's the biggest thing. It doesn't give you any hope. It just gives you useful practices. If you look at Buddhism as a philosophy, it just gives you good practice with telling you would get better results from scientific practice evidence. It's not telling you or giving you false hope, not false hope, because that could be offensive. It's not giving you hope of any kind that
I would go
by
false
doing.
hope.
Okay, yeah, it's not giving you hope of any kind, telling you by doing this, these great things will happen to you or can happen to you, which most religions, I would say, are completely based on. I mean,
I mean, the best thing is as well is if we're proved wrong on the whole religion thing, we don't have to face up and admit it because we'll be dead. So
yeah.
we don't have to admit that we're wrong.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
mean,
ultimate win-win for me.
yeah, completely. And I think this album touches a lot on. It does it in a very clever way because it's critical about religion from the perspective of a very religious man. And I don't think this religious man is necessarily the preacher character of this. He's not so far gone that he's completely unrelatable and you just look at him and go, oh my God, you're despicable. I think they managed to make quite a three-dimensional realistic character in this story.
Yeah, it's not as though he's singing from the perspective
of a cult leader or anything.
I was thinking of I think it's called Bernard Shaw, who was a cardinal who got moved. I think it was from America, and he got moved to the Archdiocese in Rome, despite touching children.
Yeah.
It's not that sort of level of.
This character's much more in the same vein as, say, your Anne Widdecombe's or something like that.
Yeah, another useless Bible basher.
But you can sort of go, all right, I understand how Anne Widdecombe functions as a human being in society, and probably you could have a conversation with her and you understand it. She's not completely disillusioned, but also she's disillusioned enough that she runs on a different wavelength to the average person.
Do you know what the funny thing is, you pulling Anne Widdecombe there, is do you know how I found out about Cardinal Bernard Shaw?
How?
It was I think it was a program called IQ. It was a debate about whether or not.
I think I've seen this.
Yeah,
is it Stephen Fry with it in there as well?
Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah. I've seen this.
That's
very great.
I can't remember who the other preacher was now. But it had Anne Widdecombe and another cardinal somewhere.
Yeah.
Who I think was from. I think it was like Ugandan or something like that.
Yeah, he was from an African nation. I can't remember specifically where.
I would say Uganda because I think it's the most religious. I think the most Christian.
I mean, because what got brought up in that conversation is kind of what we're talking about, and we're not saying it's as bad in the UK, but it definitely just exists, which is something that got brought up in that conversation is the fact that they teach people in his society that the use of condoms could actually spread AIDS, and like
that also comes from teachings from Mother Teresa as well.
Exactly. So that's where you get into how because people believe that, and then people will stop wearing condoms and people will contract AIDS, and that's where it becomes a real issue, because all of those people who follow that preacher have good intentions and have their faith isn't hurting anybody until they've listened to one person who's told them something in confidence, and because you believe them, because they are representing something that you have a lot of faith in, it's made you do something that actually can cause a lot of harm to a lot of people.
So just do a correction on where the other guy was from. He was Archbishop John Onyekan. He was from Nigeria, or he is from Nigeria.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, religion is fucked. It's the simple way of putting it. Yeah, there's always a cognitive dissonance with these things. And the same goes, it doesn't just apply to religion either. It applies to pretty much any form of organisation which controls people.
I think there's definitely there's a right way of doing it. It's just done in the wrong way so often everywhere.
Well, if you ever had your parents say, "Do as I say, not as I do,"
Yeah,
that's it in a nutshell.
a lot of the time. Yeah,
I'd say, yeah, majority of the time would be my
yeah.
view on it. But what, just out of curiosity, then, what religious texts have you read, like cover to cover?
What religious texts have I read from cover to cover? It depends what you class as a religious text. I mean, so I out of interest, I got given a King James Bible when I
Yep.
was 8 years old. I asked for it for Christmas, and I wasn't interested in becoming Christian at all, but I had read enough of the stories to find the concept of it really interesting, and I wanted to know what it had to say. So I've read, I believe, it's been so long, I'm not sure if I read it from cover to cover, but I definitely read a lot of it. Then I've also read Paradise Lost and Divine Comedy. I don't know if they class as religious texts.
Oh, so
As
yeah, I
such.
mean, religious scripture then. So yeah, like the Bible, rather than Paradise Lost and Divine Comedy, which
Right,
obviously they
right.
were.
Yeah, so I've read the Bible. I've read bits of the Torah, from what I understand. And I know sects, like certain sections of the Quran from my time in Abu Dhabi and everything, and from various different people who practice that faith of what they've told me.
Yeah, so it's pretty much what I've read then. Because I've done the Bible cover to cover, I've done the Torah and the Talmud cover to cover, and I've
Oh,
done.
and I've done, actually, sorry to backtrack as well. I've done quite a bit of, probably more so than the others actually. I've read quite a bit about the Buddha and Buddhism in general, and a lot of, I suppose there's not much scripture there, but there's a lot of verbatim word for word from the Buddha and whatnot, and yeah.
Yeah, I think the other one for me is I've done the Quran cover to cover.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I got massively interested in theology when I left school. But more in how
In a
absurd
critical
it was.
sense. In a
Yeah, more in
critical
a critical
sense.
sense, rather than I was going to become a theologian or become a clergyman. But the funny thing for me is I'm just looking at my bookshelf, like where they are. Do you want to know? So I've got the four of them all together because it makes sense. But do you want to know what I've got either side of them?
What's that?
One of them's really bad. The other one is just funny from a sort of ironic sense. So the good one first is I've got Fear and Loathing by Hunter S. Thompson,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
which is drug use, murder, all of that kind of nonsense. The other side of it is Mein Kampf.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah. Which again,
Jesus.
I've read cover to cover, and
Critically read.
the shelf above it is all the Christopher Hitchens books.
Yeah, yeah.
Shelf below it has a lot of Chinese, a lot of ancient Chinese, like the four ancient Chinese classics.
Yeah.
So the Water Margin, Romance of Three Kingdoms, blah blah blah. Also has Jurassic Park, which is something that is failed to be mentioned a lot of
But
times.
yeah, and to be completely clear on it as well, I didn't, when I got my King James Bible specifically, I didn't read it hoping, personally, I didn't read it hoping to be as critical as possible about it and be like, yeah, oh wow, how stupid is this? How stupid is that? That's not how I believe. I actually read those books because I was interested in what they had to say, and I think there's a lot of, this is where this is where I split faith and religion in a very clear sense to me, because I think there's a lot of common sense written into these books that you can definitely get a lot of good out of.
But if
And
it's
I
already
think
common sense, why do you need it written down and prescribed to you?
because it's not common sense when you're a child, like this stuff, it's a good teaching element. I think
Well, not to commit
genuinely.
murder when you're a child.
No, I know, but it goes into way more depth than that. I mean,
In
there's a
theory,
lot.
the golden rules are things that you don't have to teach a child.
No, completely. I mean, but my point is like, you know, when my little sister was a young little girl and she asked me why the sky is blue, I may come up with some imagery or metaphor or some sort of way of going, this is why the sky is blue. It's not factually correct, but later down the line, you will learn the facts and how it works actually. But this is a good basis to work from. So I think stories work well to a point, and then you get into the facts and the science behind it. And I think for much of human history, before we had the scientific understanding, these stories did a really good job of helping people out. And I think where it became an issue, in my personal belief, and where it still becomes an issue, is when you get organization involved and people are feeding your reading of the book and putting it through a certain lens. And that's where it becomes an issue. I think you can read these books and go, that's an interesting take. This is what I get from it. And I either agree with that or I don't agree with that. But then when you get a lens in front of it that says everything in this book, word for word, is fact and also should be read and this way and understood as this way, that's when you're altering someone's faith or altering someone's understanding of something and shaping it into something that may not necessarily be wrong and could corrupt and has a high chance to be corrupted in itself.
Well, I think you do raise a good point. I tend to find the best way to view any sort of religious sects like that, and even like old Greek myths and things as well, is they are stories to try and help people understand based on the knowledge they had then.
Yeah, they're moral stories, they're moral tales, and I think they still work as well for a lot of people. People still do it in language today. I mean, if I am trying to describe something to you, I may, like I just did, I may make up a story to make it clearer. And that's all it's doing is it's like you can get good stories from these books that clearly that can really help put a full stop on a point you're trying to make or an idea you're trying to get your head around.
Yeah, I think the issue for me is I don't believe it's good for moral teaching. I think it's only good as a basis to understand the science they had at the time. If that makes sense.
Completely. I mean, I think that's where we can differ. I think even to this day, if I'm trying to talk about something like, how someone should be treated if they've committed a certain crime and stuff like that, I would 9 times out of 10, I would make up an analogy myself. But you could use these stories as an analogy in themselves, and sometimes they're still really useful as long as you're presenting them in the correct lens. The problem is that the way organization works is that they want you to view everything in these books through their lens. I can read a sentence and go, well, this sentence could mean this, it could mean that. Whereas an organized religion will go, this sentence definitely does mean this. And I don't think that's useful.
I just love the fact that you can sort of tell at what point they sort of went, shit, right, well, we need our subjects to believe this instead. And then you get the New Testament.
Yeah,
it's quite a line, isn't it?
But that's a completely different faith when you get into New Testament. It is a different way of thinking, so it's not as simple as they're revising it as such.
I think it is.
I
think you can look at, so you can make exceptions for, say, well, not even the Bible, because the Bible was stolen heavily from the Torah and the Talmud for the Old Testament.
Yeah, completely. Well, stolen's the wrong word because
it's word for word.
No, yeah, but what I mean is stolen. It
was adopted.
They knew perfectly well what they were doing. Like, this isn't them going, the Torah is wrong, this is correct. They are actually going, yeah, no, we believe in the Torah, but we just have some difference in opinions in it. That's like saying the Quran, because the Quran fully acknowledges the existence of the Bible and the Torah and also agrees with it. But what the Quran turns around and says is, we think they lost their way in the teaching of it. So again, we're going back to what we believe was the right and most traditional way of doing it. But they all acknowledge each other's existence. They don't say that no religion, as far as I understand it, says that the other text is wrong. They
are preached that.
No, they preach that the understanding of each text is wrong. That's where it differs.
I think if you were to ask, say, a preacher rather in the deep south of America, let's say, they'll tell you that the Bible is 100% correct and all the other books are wrong.
Oh yeah,
that's what I mean. Sorry, is the adopting of it is, I think you're letting him off with too much.
No, yeah. So, but you're talking about a specific preacher. I'm talking about the organizations as a whole. I think the organization, for example. Okay. Sorry if anyone finds it offensive for calling it an organization, or whatever. But for example, the organization of Catholicism doesn't reject the Torah. The organization. If you ask
the Pope, they would say yes, it does. Yes, we had early beliefs on Judaism, but what we say is correct and what they say is wrong.
No, but my point is they acknowledge, yes, we had early beliefs of Judaism. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you can acknowledge the text. You can acknowledge the text exists, but they do all proclaim to have the ultimate answer, and that the others are wrong.
But they still acknowledge the fact that they were developed from a previous religion. Is what my point.
Yeah, but if I were to walk into, say, the local shop down here.
Yeah, the average person doesn't think that.
No. So no, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say, if I
right.
was to walk into a shop, my local shop, and steal a Cadbury's cream egg,
Mm-hmm.
and walk out of it, not pay for it and everything, they still got a bunch of cream eggs, but I've got my own cream egg. This is my cream egg.
Mm.
It's that kind of mentality of, yes, we have stolen this, but they are wrong.
Yeah, but again, they didn't steal it. It's basically, it's me and you reading the same sentence, having two different understandings of it, and me going, I don't believe in your understanding, so I'm going to go with what I believe.
I agree with that in terms of the splitting them between Catholicism, Church of England, Lutheranism, and all that kind of stuff. I don't believe that in terms of the split between religions as a whole. So the split between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all of those are split on the basis that they are the ultimate one. Elsewise, you would just happily believe in all of those. Whereas
but I think if you're obviously the average person doesn't do this, but I think if you go into the higher ups, like the scholars of these sects or the actual organizations themselves, I do think that they acknowledge the fact of the existence of the other books, and they acknowledge the fact that all they're saying is that, like, for example, the Quran, like scholars of the Quran would say, no, yeah, we do believe in the Bible and we do believe in the Torah, but what we don't believe is the teachings from them and the way people have lost their way. That's why we have the Quran, which brings us back to how we think that religion began and how it was supposed to be taught.
I think we're saying the same thing pretty much.
But I think
we're saying it in different ways. I'm just harsher than you are.
Yeah, I think because I think that it's wrong. You're saying it in the average person's point of view, which is the average.
No, I'm saying it as organizational.
No. But what I'm saying is sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But what I'm saying is the average person would again be like, yeah, well, they stole this and they did this and they're wrong, and that's true. And that's what the majority are, maybe not the majority, but a lot of religious people do believe that. But I think if you go, the higher up you go, the more understanding, the more convincing of these people you talk to will acknowledge and go, look, yes, it's the same. They acknowledge it's the same faith. They acknowledge it's monotheism. They acknowledge that they're all worshipping a god, and that is probably all the same god. But we're acknowledging that we believe they just praise that God and their faith based upon that God is the wrong way of doing it. And we believe ours is the correct way.
But I'm still hung up on the fact that you won't say it's stolen.
Because it's not stolen, it's adapted.
Stealing.
It's not stolen, it's adapted. And they acknowledge it's adapted.
So if I were to record a song, we'll bring it back to music for a minute. Yeah. If I were to record a song and say it's the same riff as Whole Lot of Love, but rather than just add, I think it's the D or the A note, whatever it is in there. So on the I'll go down and bend it instead. I've adapted their riff, but I've stolen it.
Completely. But
that's what these texts are.
That's not what they.
Moments.
Right. I'll put history down in my understanding in a really simple way of it, and then I think at risk of sounding really offensive to someone, but this is my understanding.
Oh, it's okay. So, I will be more offensive in a minute. It's fine.
If you lay it out like this, it doesn't sound stolen. It just sounds like so. You have your Judaism, which goes for years and years and years, based off essentially the same text as what Christians now believe is the Old Testament. It's essentially the same thing. Sorry if that offends anyone, but I think most people can acknowledge. I mean, there's even same characters. So you get that. And then at a certain point,
a reboot.
Yeah. And then you get that. And at a certain point, you get Jesus. And Jesus comes along and preaches, in the sort of the Turkey sort of area, in that area of the world. and preaches.
Well, it's Middle Eastern, wasn't it?
Yeah, and preaches and says that there is more to the story. There is more knowledge. There is more that needs to be learnt and needs to be taught, and people have lost their way and whatnot. And then Jesus dies, and his followers, the 12 disciples, they preach forward this form of religion, and it acknowledges the previous ones, but also goes, yo, there's also more to be had and added. And a load of people follow Christianity because they're like, well, yeah, we've learnt more now. And a load of people don't, because they don't acknowledge that, because obviously maybe he's a false preacher, or maybe he was claiming to be more important than he did. That's up for debate. Anyway, you get hundreds of years in the future, or debatably thousands of years in the future, and then religion has shifted and changed, and people have started to eat more foods and stuff like that. Because the other big difference with Christian and, for example, say Judaism, is the amount of food you can eat, the amount of liberties you can have. That obviously plays into it as well. So people go, oh, I'm going to join this adapted one because it becomes a bit easier lifestyle for me. Holding my hands up, and sorry if that offends anyone, but that's the way history looks at it. And then you go 1,000 years or so in the future, and some people are getting really uncomfortable with the idea of how both previous religions of this same monotheistic religion have changed over time, and how they've become more organizational, how more money has got funneled some places, if you look at the Catholic Church and whatnot. And they go, well, this isn't the way it originally was supposed to be had and started. We're going to create our religion again. And so you get Islam, and Islam acknowledges both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus is a character in the Quran, but he's a preacher. And they go back to, you know what, we're going to go back to the basics, and we're going to go, this is what God told Muhammad. Well, no, sorry, Angel Gabriel tells Muhammad, yo, religion's lost its way, but this is what God did say, and this is the way it should be. Can you please bring it back to basics? It's what Angel Gabriel says in a more modern day speak. And they go,
get it back to the start, yo.
And they go, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to become stricter again. We're going to restrict what we eat again, because that is what God intended. And we're going to go back to the way it should have been. We acknowledge all of that's happened since, and we acknowledge Jesus Christ, and we acknowledge these preachers, and we acknowledge that what they're saying may or may not be correct. And we're going to take all of that into account, but also live our lives in the way that we believe God said, word for word, is the way it's supposed to be spoken. If you look at it through the lens of history like that, that's not stolen. That's in some cases adaptive, or just acknowledging a change, and in some cases going, no, I'm not acknowledging this change. And then in other cases reverting because they feel like it's lost its way. It's all adapting from the same thing. And I'm sorry if people find that offensive, but that is how history says these religions came about.
It's cool. I'm about to put my position forward now, and I'm going to be more offensive because mine's a harsher look at it. So I agree. We're looking at it through the lens of history. Yeah. I think history shows it on a slightly different track. I think you're basing it on religions trying to catch up with how people are doing things. I think it's different. I think it's how the organization, whether it be, say, a monarchy like ourselves, or, how things were set up in previous times, how they were trying to get their citizens to be. Mm-hmm. So rather than the change coming from the people, the change is coming from the organizations. That's how I view it. So Judaism, I think, was created to try and give them, that was probably created more down to how the people were, purely because, at least in terms of Western texts,
it's harder in the lens of history to pinpoint the origins of Judaism in general, because it's
exactly
stupidly ancient.
Mm-hmm. So I view it like this, and this is probably because I'm more influenced by Christopher Hitchens than anybody else on the subject. So Judaism, that worked for that population at that time. Other population or another government, they want to bring in how they see order, so they put what they want in there. And then you have the New Testament, and you have Christianity, and then the same goes then for Islam, or the Muslim faith. Is you then have again a different section of people with a different leader. They want their people to be this way, so they then steal what they've got from the past, write a new text to fit it. they're not doing anything. It's not adapting and saying, oh, well, we think they're wrong because of this. It's more, we
But
want
it's
to
not.
cow our people in this way.
I was going to say it's not stealing because they already have it.
Well, no, it depends where. It depends. They may already have it, but then they're then stealing it for their own purposes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where I'm harsher with it, if that makes sense. And it's more
I get where you're
semantic.
coming from. And in your story here is when you're talking about these leaders, you're talking about, say, the disciples and stuff like that. Because
I would be more
Christianity specifically, when that came about, that came more grassroots from the lower classes. Like there was not really an organization at the time.
Well, obviously not when it was first around. But I would be more. I think I'd be more generous and not call it stealing if it was by the same teachers, let's say. Whereas I think
that's so ancient, though. That's impossible.
Yeah, but I think there's a clear. You can tell by the way the world's divided up nowadays. There's a clear sort of pattern of we're using it to fit our own needs rather than we're using it to help our population.
Completely, I get you.
So that's where I go with stealing, because I think for something that causes a lot of chaos and a lot of rubbish, you should use harsher terms for it. But
yeah,
it's more of a semantic argument, isn't it, rather than
completely. And I would agree if you want to look at, say, oh right, well, for some reason our Catholic Church situates itself in Italy, which, genuinely speaking, historically had fuck all to do with any of the beginning of any of this,
and the home of the mafia.
Yeah, it's a bit weird how you've managed to, yes, steal that, take all of that, bring it over to the West where it would be more financially profitable. Up for debate, I mean, but that, that's how history says it.
Yeah, and I just think it's, people using it for their own needs is where we end up here. But a lot of our argument is based purely on
kingdoms. I mean, you can look at a map and go, well, this area of the world is more Islamic, this area of the world is more Christian. They made their own kingdoms, and money has to be involved with that and whatnot. And obviously, it becomes difficult when politics gets involved as well, because if you look at Islam and all of those countries, they base their whole political systems and the ways that they run their countries off of their beliefs. And
there's one thing that pulls religion
territorial.
There's one thing that pulls Christianity apart in my eyes. Out of all the animals that are put on Noah's Ark, none of them are kangaroos.
No, I know. Who said that? It's Jim Jeffries, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Well remembered.
I love Jim Jeffries, yeah.
Yeah, Jim Jeffries is awesome. But yeah, it's sort of like, you can tell based on the knowledge they had at the time it was written for that particular population, rather than this is how the world is and it's spoken to us from God. Because God would know Australia was there. Is it convenient that he's just not telling anybody, or is he hiding it? It's like, this is a dangerous place. It's full of bad spiders. It's got fucking wandering spiders which will leap at you and they're giant.
No, but this is where the age-old excuse for racism and slavery and discrimination came about, because
exactly
the idea is if they weren't involved, God made it that way for a reason. So they are lesser human beings, which is where that we get into more political. And
right. I'm going to win us some supporters here. Now, we've been extremely harsh on religion. We've said, well, in some religious sects we'll probably have very controversial views.
Yeah.
However, so when we talk about, this is going back in the thing a little bit now, when we're talking about the idea of people preaching against the use of condoms, things like that, and saying that that's an empowerment of the nation. No, the only way to empower nations like that is not through banning condoms. It's through one thing and one thing only. And thank you, Christopher Hitchens, again. I will be stealing this from you. It is the empowerment of women.
That's fact. That's known historical fact throughout the whole of history.
It is indeed.
Do that, nations thrive.
Exactly. And you've seen the same clip I have, obviously. That was
and there's strong debate. I'm going to go back and be very offensive again. There's strong debate that part of the reasons why they will preach something like condoms could spread AIDS, specifically to all girls' schools in these African countries.
Condoms are bad, not condoms. Yeah, condoms spread AIDS, sorry.
Yeah. Is potentially to suppress the advancement of women in these regions for that exact reason. Well, and I'm not, and for anyone listening as well, I'm not saying that as when I talk about talking to all women's schools and stuff like that, I'm saying that from first-hand experience. I went to Tanzania with a couple school friends when I was younger, and I had to witness a religious debate between an all-girls school and an all-guys school, and this is some of the stuff that came up and what very specifically preaching to women, young women, who are, going to take these beliefs forward, and they're all very, very religious, which is absolutely fine. But the way they're being taught it does not empower them, and it, in fact, does the opposite.
Well, yeah, it's the same.
And this, but to go back as well, this was like a decade ago. Things may have, differed slightly.
Well, I think this goes back to at least my core belief, and I'm assuming at least some of your core belief, is people should just be equal.
Oh,
the equality of people is the thing that everybody should be striving for.
Yeah.
So, and at the moment, obviously, the fire is mainly with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I hope that continues. I hope people continue pushing that button.
Completely, 100%, and also to make some clarity on that as well, because this is something I'm going a bit off topic, and I will go back to religion in a second as well. But
we'll go back to the album at some point.
yeah. Well, no, because the thing is
this is a theology pod.
No, but the point is we've got into this discussion from this album, and this is the exact kind of discussion that this album and Gavin Clark is trying to make. Throughout this entire album, he's definitely fighting with a lot of faith, and there is some. You can tell he's sympathetic towards it as well. And I was about to say, like, to make it clear and not be completely anti-religious, when we talk about religion in the lens of history, and we're talking about a lot about ancient history, and yes, we're talking a lot about, we may have mentioned once or twice and that worked for the time, but it doesn't necessarily work now. Now, of course, these texts and these religions are ancient and old, and they never knew how the advancement of society would go. And
they're archaic.
Yeah, but that doesn't make them wrong either, though, because there is strong argument for a lot of our advancements, and a lot of the ways we have shifted to society are really bad for us as an animal species. I mean, I would debate, we go back to it earlier, but we've managed to create bombs. We also have the internet, which is, very debatable as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And in a lot of ways, the simplicity or the values that some of these religions hold about the way you should live your life outside of these virtual means or these technological means are very healthy, very healthy, and should be taken on board.
My counterpoint to that, then, just quickly.
Apart from stuff like medicine and stuff.
I wasn't going to say medicine, actually. I was going to go purely from... I've forgotten what counterpoint it was now. So you're saying that how much of that, though, is less about the advancement of society in terms of what they wanted, and more just because that's what they had at the time?
No, but
I would couch it all based in history. So if that's the way their settlements were at the time, then of course they're going to write about it from that perspective, because they want people to be cowed into that sector.
Completely. But what I mean is, again, that's what was useful at the time, and that's probably why it was developed. But what I'm talking about, outside of organized religion, where people find their faith in religion, there's a lot of use in it. And there's a lot of use in your mental health if you do believe in those things. I sometimes have gone through a phase where I wish I was religious because of the mental health values I think it could give sometimes. I'm not going to knock faith of any kind, but I think me and you differ in this. But the values of in my opinion, the values of faith and how that can translate into a practical way of living, again, outside of virtualized, disenfranchised capitalism, is very useful and very valuable, and I think we could have a lot more of it. I do think there's a perfect world that does exist, where you have technological advancement and faith, and an understanding of it that is mature and not forced in any way, where people who are religious can be around people who aren't, and we all just respect the faiths and stuff. The reason why that becomes so difficult is how these organizations make decisions and preach in ways that actually impact negatively on a lot of people's lives. And I think that is something that can be gotten rid of.
Yeah, I'd agree to that most of the time. I think with the mental health aspect, I've never had that moment, that sort of come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
Like where I've even at my worst, when I've been at my most suicidal, when I've literally been sat there with all my pills in my hand, ready to take them.
Yeah, I mean, neither have I.
never,
Like I said, I wish I've gone through moments where I wish that would happen to me. That I suddenly just clicked and went, "Yo, I believe in this." But of course, I can lie to myself. I don't.
yeah, I've never even had that moment where I wish that I believed in it.
Right.
Because I always view it as, I think it's because I do view it strongly as I want to say, enemy is a strong word. I do view it as, an enemy of the populace, really. It goes back to, do I want to live in a dictatorship or not? If I believe in religion, then inherently I'm believing that I want to be in a dictatorship. There's one guy at the top, he tells me all the rules.
Yeah.
And that's something I could never bring myself to believe or want to believe. But yeah, even at my worst, I've been sat there and I know that if I die, I go back to nothingness. And I think a lot of religion, the fact that people have the faith, is because they want the comfort in something, there is something after. When in reality, we are basically just specks of dust in the cosmic viewing of things.
Yeah,
we're gonna die, we're gonna fade, we're not gonna be remembered.
Yeah,
tough.
I think what I'm getting at a little bit when I talk about the values of it is and I can relate this again to what I was going to say about the Black Lives Matter movement, is how organizations, or how the average person can look at an organization and their view of that organization can distort the value of something. And
That's a weird noise. I just went, I don't know if that was a cough or a breath that's supposed to be coming out, but I inhaled it.
That's okay. So one thing that I've noticed a lot recently, and I've gotten into discussions with family members or friends of family and whatnot, is, we've all heard it. People turn around and go, well, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but what about all lives matter? And genuinely, I think what's happening with these people, it's a fucking stupid statement, but what's happening with these people is they're looking at Black Lives Matter through an organization lens, and that's ruining the value. And what's not helping is the media. So basically, the media portray it as the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's centered towards African Americans, or in general, black people all over the world. And that's where the coverage is. So the average person turns around and goes, oh, well, yeah, but what about these lives, these lives, these lives? And I've had interesting conversations with people who've gone, well, no, I completely understand that. But what I'm also talking about is, what about Indian lives? What about Islamic lives in the West? What about, gay rights and everything like that? And what people don't realize is, at all of these protests, those people are there being represented as well.
There's one great rebuke to that whole thing of what it's all lives matter, or it's what about gay lives, or LGBTQ plus and all that kind of nonsense. I'm not saying LGBTQ plus is nonsense, but I just mean that whole general thing of well, yeah, but why are we talking about black lives? The instant rebuke, I can't remember whose quote this is, or that I'm paraphrasing now, but imagine there's a fire at a house next door.
Yeah.
You need to put out that fire. You don't go to the fireman and say, well, can you do my house? My house isn't on fire.
Yeah,
Their
exactly.
house is. You've got to deal with what's there.
No, yeah,
and
that's true.
That's the thing. Trans rights is a massive thing at the moment. We've seen a lot of people get hung and quartered by certain sections of the community, mostly on Twitter, because of their views on trans rights. And they're framing the debate as women's rights versus trans rights, which is a debate I'm not fucking knowledgeable enough or skilled enough to get into. Yeah. I don't know where I stand on any of that. It's not something that directly affects me, and that's selfish, I know. Yeah. But again, it goes back to that thing of just believe in equality. Just believe that people should be equal.
But what I was getting at in terms of the organization side of things is that people aren't understanding, because I have heard people when I've heard some people that when they're saying, yeah, but all lives matter, they're not talking about white people and everything like that, but they are talking about what about LGBT representation and everything like that. And what I was trying to get at in terms of the organization side of things is that the media have put it in a lens that Black Lives Matter is an organization that is only centered around black lives. And that's not true, because...
Well, it's the same with Antifa as well. It's like these things aren't actually organizations.
No, well, yeah, one, they're not organizations, but two, even if you were going to put them as an organization, then it's not being covered that they are completely for gay rights. They're completely for Islamic rights. They're completely for, and all of these people are being represented there at these protests. If you go to these protests, there's a load of different flags being waved, and there's a load of different banners out there, and there's a load of different chants, and it's a lot of togetherness, and it's a lot about equality. Yes, it's being called Black Lives Matter because that's how it started, and two, that is a very, very prominent issue worldwide, of course, and yeah, maybe, it's difficult. It seems difficult, and it seems like all of these people who are also minorities are getting pushed aside, but they're actually not. It's the media doing that. And the thing is, if you were going to make this Black Lives Matter an organization, there's a lot of value in it. The value is that they're talking about equality, and they're talking about all forms of equality of every kind. Yes, it has a name, Black Lives Matter, but it's talking about all forms of equality of every kind. The value's being missed because of the way the organization is being represented. Sorry, and like
I wish religion would help you with your language.
Yeah,
there.
and that's
what wow.
and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about religion as well. Is religion is tainted because of the lens of the organization that heads it. But within those organizations, there is a lot of good. There's a lot of value. There are some good things that these organizations do, and there are some amazing people that do follow these organizations. The problem is the that doesn't escape from the fact that, like, you got to stop viewing it as an organization. You've got to also look at you've got to separate, the good follower who is by no means meaning to do anything wrong and actually does a lot of good on a day-to-day basis, and the guy at the top who is hoarding all the money and everything like that. That's my stance.
Well, I think that's why discussion is based around organized religion. It's not based around just the people. It's based around the actual organization itself.
That's what I'm talking about when I talking about.
Yeah, I've got
I've
got no hatred for people who believe in Christianity, who follow it and preach and all that. That's not my issue. My issue is the way it's organized. But it goes back to, I just think,
and I don't mean that to reflect. And I don't mean that to reflect badly as a counterpoint on the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't think that's organized terribly or anything like that. I believe the organizations who are doing the media coverage are putting them in a box that is representing them in a very,
I think when we say media as well, it's one of the odd things where usually you can pinpoint and go, well, it's left media or it's right-wing media. But oddly, it's both sides of the debate are framing it as the Black Lives Matter movement. This is the organization. It's not an organization though. It's just people coming together because they believe in equality.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line.
And it just so happens that that one slogan is the one that it's caught on. It's got the most coverage in both very great positive ways and in both annoying negative ways.
The problem is
the media has done.
It does put a target on their back, and if you watch, say, sort of like Fox News or you watch, whatever in the UK. It does present a target that they can kick.
Completely, and it's easy to manipulate. And the thing is, a lot of people have missed out on the irony of these slogans. The point is you're supposed to look at them. I mean, so for example, if I held up a sign saying the Holocaust was bad, people are supposed to look at that and go, well, yeah, duh. You're supposed to look at that and go, yeah, of course it is. And anybody who believes that would go, why would you even have to fly that flag? The point is that there's a load of people that would look at it and go, actually,
well, what about the Khmer Rouge?
Exactly. And that's the issue. Is if you're looking at the Black Lives Matter slogan and going, well, hang on, in any sense, if you in any kind of sense for a second, if you hesitate when you look at that banner, then you're part of the issue. And the banner's ironic. You're supposed to look at it and go, well, yeah, duh. And we want the whole world to go, well, look at it and go, well, yeah, duh. The problem is so many people don't. And I hate to say it, but even if you're someone who supports the movement, but even slightly questions it, then you need to do some internal reflection. You need to look at it and go, well, what is it that made you hesitate for a second? You may not be an inherently racist person, but do you have something in you that gave you a little bit of doubt And does that need to be checked on a little bit?
Well, yeah, so like I said earlier, it's the reflection of things. Like personally, my belief is purely equality. We need to be trying to strive for an equal society. It doesn't matter whether or not it impacts me
Also,
economically badly.
But also, if you flew a banner saying that, it wouldn't get any coverage, and it doesn't get any sort of controversial or any sort of attention. If I just flew a banner saying "Love everybody," no one gives a shit about that. You've got to pinpoint these issues.
Love everybody unless they're a cunt. In which case, I'm expecting nobody to love me. But I'm gonna end it. I'm gonna end it on one point then. So going back to the religious part of it, it's an old question that Chris Hitchens used to do, which is, can you name a moral act that can only be done under the name of religion? But can you name an immoral act that can only be that? How have I got the question right? That'd be a good start. But it's basically saying, like, can you name any good act that only Christians can do or only religious people can do, not sectarians like myself? But can you name immoral acts that only religious people can create and persecute?
Completely.
And unfortunately, that's the way it is. But the problem is, we like going back onto the topic slightly. Favorite songs. Favorite songs.
And one thing we to quickly touch on before we get to favorite songs is this album has forced this discussion, which is the right thing to do. Like that's the sort of thing that Gavin Clark was looking to get with these sort of discussions. You should definitely listen to the album. It definitely makes you think. Obviously, we had a lot to think about and wanted to vent off of our chests.
I think it's mostly because I want to get us back on subject because I need to piss at some point.
But yeah, completely. But also,
it's almost 3 hours.
Outside of the deep messages of the album, it also is very musically great and very sonically lovely as well.
Oh, it sounds so like
it does sound
pointless
trivial
talking
now.
about the album now.
Yeah, the point is we're talking about stuff that the album wanted us to talk about. I also just want to let people know it's also a really lovely sounding album.
It's a fantastic sounding album. I liked the way I was thinking of it earlier. It's like if Neil Gaiman wrote an album.
Yeah, completely.
It's got that sort of dark tint around it, but in the end, it's lovely. It's really lovely.
And obviously, the subject matter very, very deep and personal and important. But
you're going to find it ironic in a minute when you know what my favourite song is.
Well, so I think I can guess your favourite song.
Go on.
But it was between two.
Okay.
And I don't know. So my initial choice was gonna be "No One Will Ever Know," is what I thought your favorite song was. Is that right?
Nope.
So then the other one I was gonna say is "God's Song."
Yes,
God's Song.
Damn it, you are on fucking fire.
Yeah, I'm good. I know this shit.
You're good at this. I'm not as good at this. Fuck it, I'm gonna say "No One Will Ever Know" is yours.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. In fact, both of them that I just said are my two personal favorites in the album as well.
Well, God's Song, to go back to the Indulgents, part of the reason I loved it is if you ever listen to "I Am Koresh" from the David Koresh Superstar album, the way he sings or the way the lyrics flow is very, very similar, and so it just grabbed me. I was like, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah. Oh, one thing to make a point on actually is Gavin Clark's vocals themselves are great on this album. Like he was an excellent singer, and he had a lot of great ways of playing around with his voice. And in God's Song specifically, when it crescendos and he's just screaming like a preacher, a really passionate one of those preachers that you see on TV out of America sort of thing. There's a lot, you can tell he had a lot of passion about this project, and it's similar to the album we were talking about earlier on this podcast, which feels like a year ago. Like her, he plays around with his voice and just does some excellent stuff with it on this album. It's really good.
Yeah, I think as well, the comparison to John Frusciante for me from Empyrean is big because I'm a massive John Frusciante fan. One of my favourite musicians of all time. So to hear any album that sounds like any of his stuff makes me happy.
Yeah,
even if it's solo stuff, not his chilly stuff. But also that goes into Two Drum as well, because John Frusciante went into electronic music heavily.
Yeah.
Over the past few years. Is it like Letter Le Feur, I think his first one's called, but it also has stuff with Trick Pony in that as well.
Fair.
Yeah, so see, I know some stuff.
There
I'm
you
not a
go.
big fan of that stuff, but I know some stuff. I'm more a fan of just John Frusciante solo or with
Fair.
Josh Klinghoffer.
Well, I'm glad
is-
you enjoyed this one, man.
I did. It was good. It was, as it turned out, I shouldn't have worried too much about whether or not the episode would be interesting.
Yeah.